Evelyn and Mark Thompson were the golden couple of Cedar Ridge. 5 years ago, they moved into their stylish home on Oak Avenue and quickly became beloved members of the community. Mark's charm and quick wit made him a favorite at neighborhood events, while Evelyn, with her radiant smile and passion for photography, was adored by everyone she met. Together, they hosted elegant dinner parties, supported local charities, and were often seen walking their dog, Bella, through the tree-lined streets, embodying the essence of marital happiness. Mark was a rising star in real estate, known for his sharp instincts and impressive sales record. Evelyn, on the other hand, ran a successful online business selling handcrafted jewelry. Their social circle included other young professionals and couples who often remarked on how perfectly matched they were. Mark was the outgoing, driven partner, while Evelyn provided a nurturing, supportive presence. To the outside world, Mark and Evelyn had it all. But as time passed, small cracks began to appear in their seemingly perfect life. The first signs of trouble were minor disagreements over everyday matters. Mark would express frustration over Evelyn's increasing time spent on her business, while Evelyn would criticize Mark's tendency to bring work stress home. These disagreements were dismissed as typical marital spats, but they hinted at deeper issues. Their friends noticed the slight shift in their dynamic, but thought it was just part of the normal pressures of life. However, those closer to the Thompsons began to sense a growing tension. Evelyn's laughter seemed less frequent, and Mark's affectionate gestures appeared more forced. Yet, in public, they maintained the facade of the perfect couple. Despite the underlying discord, Mark and Evelyn continued to present a united front. They celebrated their anniversaries with romantic getaways and posted loving tributes to each other on social media. But behind closed doors, their fights grew more frequent and intense, setting the stage for the dark events that would ultimately shatter their lives. As the months passed, the arguments between Mark and Evelyn escalated. Evelyn's need for control began to surface, and Mark's frustration with her increasingly critical behavior grew with each passing day. The idyllic image of their marriage slowly disintegrated, revealing a toxic dynamic from which neither could escape. Evelyn's control extended beyond the household. She began to dictate how Mark should dress, who he could spend time with, and even how he should manage his career. Mark, once a confident and independent man, found himself constantly walking on eggshells, trying to avoid Evelyn's wrath. One evening, during a dinner party at their home, the tension between Mark and Evelyn was palpable. Mark accidentally spilled wine on the carpet, and Evelyn's reaction was swift and brutal. She berated him in front of their guests, her face contorted with anger. The room fell silent, thick with awkwardness. Mark apologized meekly, his cheeks flushed with embarrassment. After the guests left, Evelyn continued her tirade. Mark tried to explain, but his words only seemed to fuel her anger. It was during these moments that Mark saw a side of Evelyn he had never fully acknowledged before, a side that was increasingly difficult to ignore. The woman he had once loved and admired was now a source of fear and anxiety. Mark confided in his brother, Daniel, about the growing issues in his marriage. Daniel was shocked to hear about Evelyn's behavior, as she had always been warm and kind whenever they met. He urged Mark to consider leaving her, but Mark was hesitant. He still loved Evelyn and hoped their problems could be resolved through therapy and open communication. Evelyn dismissed the idea of therapy, believing their issues were just part of the normal challenges of marriage. She continued to exert control over every aspect of Mark's life, from his work to his friendships. Mark felt increasingly isolated and trapped, his once vibrant personality dimming under the weight of Evelyn's dominance. The unraveling of Mark and Evelyn's marriage was deeply rooted in their pasts, hidden traumas, and manipulative tendencies that had remained buried until now. Evelyn's need for control stemmed from her childhood, where she had grown up in a household dominated by a controlling mother. Mark's past was marked by a different kind of trauma. He had been in a relationship during his college years that ended in betrayal, leaving him with deep emotional scars. He had worked hard to rebuild his life, finding solace in his career and the love he shared with Evelyn. But as the years went by, the echoes of his past trauma resurfaced, exacerbated by Evelyn's controlling behavior. Their marriage, which had once seemed like a partnership of equals, transformed into a battleground of wills. Evelyn's manipulative tendencies became more pronounced, and Mark's hidden traumas were exploited. Evelyn would use Mark's past against him, belittling his experiences and making him feel unworthy of love and respect. She manipulated his emotions, alternating between affectionate gestures and harsh criticisms, leaving Mark constantly second-guessing himself. Mark's attempts to seek help from friends or family were often thwarted by Evelyn's interference. She would charm his friends, making them believe that Mark was exaggerating or being overly sensitive. She isolated him from those who could offer support, ensuring that he remained dependent on her. The twisted game of manipulation and control escalated over time. Evelyn would gaslight Mark, making him doubt his own perceptions and memories. She would hide his belongings, then accuse him of being careless and forgetful. She would criticize his appearance and decisions, slowly undermining his confidence. Mark, caught in this web of psychological abuse, felt his sense of reality slipping away. Despite the escalating abuse, Mark clung to the hope that things could change. He believed that if he just tried harder, if he just loved Evelyn enough, things would go back to the way they were. He blamed himself for the growing tension, convinced that he was the problem. Evelyn reinforced this belief, using it to tighten her grip on him. The turning point in Mark and Evelyn's tumultuous relationship came one night during an argument that escalated beyond verbal altercations. It started as a typical disagreement over Mark's work schedule, but the tension quickly mounted. Evelyn's face twisted with anger as she accused Mark of neglecting her and being ungrateful for everything she had done for him. Mark, his patience worn thin, snapped back, telling Evelyn that he was tired of her constant criticism and control. The argument spiraled out of control, with both of them shouting and hurling accusations. Evelyn's anger boiled over, and for the first time, she struck Mark. The force of the blow sent him reeling, his cheeks stinging from the impact. The room fell silent, as the reality of what had just happened set in. Evelyn, momentarily stunned by her own actions, quickly regained her composure and began to apologize profusely. She promised it would never happen again, blaming the stress of work and the pressures of life. Mark, shocked and hurt, didn't know how to respond. He had never imagined that their arguments would turn physical. Despite his fear, a part of him still clung to the hope that Evelyn could change. He accepted her apology, convincing himself that it was a one-time incident, an unfortunate outburst that wouldn't be repeated. But the physical abuse didn't stop. Over the following weeks, Evelyn's outbursts became more frequent and violent. Mark tried to hide the bruises, making excuses for his injuries when friends or colleagues asked. He became adept at covering up the signs of abuse, using makeup to mask the bruises and long sleeves to hide the marks. His once vibrant spirit was replaced by a shadow of his former self, his eyes reflecting a deep-seated fear and sadness. In a desperate attempt to break free from the cycle of abuse, Mark confided in his closest friend, Paul. He told Paul about the physical violence and Evelyn's controlling behavior, hoping that sharing his secret would give him the strength to leave. Paul was horrified and immediately offered his support, urging Mark to contact a domestic violence hotline and seek help. Mark took Paul's advice and called the hotline, speaking to a counselor who provided him with resources and a safety plan. He started to make preparations to leave, gathering important documents and saving money in a hidden account. Mark felt a glimmer of hope, believing that he could escape the nightmare his life had become. However, Evelyn's control over Mark was stronger than he anticipated. She grew suspicious of his actions, noticing the small changes in his behavior and the secretive nature of his movements. Her paranoia intensified, and she began to monitor him closely, checking his phone and following him when he left the house. Mark's attempts to break free were thwarted at every turn as Evelyn tightened her grip on his life. The breaking point came when Mark tried to leave one night, only to be caught by Evelyn as he was sneaking out of the house with a suitcase. Enraged, Evelyn dragged him back inside, accusing him of betrayal and threatening him with dire consequences if he ever tried to leave again. Mark, terrified and defeated, realized that escaping Evelyn's control was more difficult than he had ever imagined. In the days that followed, Evelyn's behavior grew increasingly erratic. She installed surveillance cameras in the house, monitored Mark's every move, and cut off his access to the outside world. Mark felt like a prisoner in his own home, his every action scrutinized and controlled. The glimmer of hope that had once sustained him was extinguished, replaced by a sense of despair and resignation. The twisted game of manipulation and control had reached a dangerous new level, with Evelyn's paranoia and violence threatening to consume them both. Despite the overwhelming fear and isolation, Mark continued to hold on to a sliver of hope. He documented the abuse in a hidden journal, detailing each incident with meticulous care. One night, after a particularly violent argument, Mark decided he couldn't take it anymore. The fight had started over a minor issue, Evelyn accusing him of not being appreciative enough, but it quickly escalated. Evelyn's rage was uncontrollable, and she beat Mark until he was barely conscious. As he lay on the floor, battered and bleeding, Mark made a silent vow to escape, no matter the cost. Over the next few days, Mark meticulously planned his escape. He reached out to Paul through a coded message, arranging a time and place to meet. Paul, understanding the gravity of the situation, agreed to help without hesitation. On the night of their planned escape, Mark waited until Evelyn was asleep before making his move. He quietly gathered his pre-packed bag and slipped out of the house, his heart pounding in his chest as he made his way to the meeting spot. Every shadow and sound amplified his fear. Paul was waiting at the designated spot, his car idling and ready to go. Mark climbed into the passenger seat, his hands shaking as he clutched his bag. Paul didn't waste any time, driving away from the house as quickly as possible. The sense of relief Mark felt was overwhelming, but it was quickly tempered by the realization that his freedom was still fragile. They drove to a nearby town where Paul had arranged for Mark to stay at a men's shelter. The shelter provided a safe haven, a place where Mark could begin to rebuild his life without fear of Evelyn's retribution. The staff at the shelter were supportive and understanding, helping Mark navigate the legal process of obtaining a restraining order and pressing charges against Evelyn. For the first time in years, Mark felt a glimmer of hope. He was surrounded by people who believed him, who validated his experience and provided him with the support he desperately needed. The journey to recovery was daunting, but Mark was determined to reclaim his life and break free from the cycle of abuse. However, Evelyn was not willing to let go so easily. When she discovered Mark's absence, her rage knew no bounds. She used every resource at her disposal to track him down, refusing to accept that he had escaped her control. The twisted game of manipulation and control had reached its final deadly stage, setting the stage for a confrontation that would have tragic consequences. Mark had been staying at the men's shelter for a few weeks, slowly beginning to heal and regain his sense of self. The staff and other residents provided a supportive community, helping him navigate the complexities of his situation. He had obtained a restraining order against Evelyn, and the shelter had taken measures to ensure his safety. However, Evelyn's obsession with Mark only grew stronger in his absence. She scoured social media to track him down, her need to control him reaching a dangerous level. Driven by a toxic mix of anger, jealousy, and possessiveness, Evelyn's paranoia and determination to reclaim Mark culminated in a meticulously planned confrontation. On the night of July 15th, Evelyn finally discovered Mark's location. She had been stalking the shelter for days, watching and waiting for the right moment. When she saw Mark leave the shelter to run an errand, she followed him, careful to remain undetected. Mark was unaware of her presence, his mind occupied with thoughts of his new life and the steps he needed to take to move forward. As Mark returned to the shelter, he felt a strange unease, a sense that something was not right. He quickened his pace, his heart racing as he approached the shelter's entrance. Before he could reach the door, Evelyn appeared, blocking his path. The look in her eyes was a chilling combination of rage and determination. Evelyn's voice was low and menacing as she demanded that Mark come with her. Mark tried to remain calm, his voice shaking as he told her to leave and that he had a restraining order against her. But Evelyn was beyond reason. She grabbed his arm, her grip tight and painful, and started dragging him towards her car. Mark struggled, screaming for help, but the street was deserted, and his cries went unanswered. In a desperate bid to break free, Mark managed to pull out his phone and dial 911. The call connected, but before he could speak, Evelyn slapped the phone out of his hand, sending it crashing to the ground. Mark's panic intensified as he realized the severity of the situation. Evelyn's anger was palpable, her grip on his arm unrelenting. In a final desperate attempt to escape, Mark kicked Evelyn and tried to run, but she was faster and stronger. She caught up to him and, in a fit of rage, began to beat him mercilessly. Mark's cries for help echoed through the empty street, but no one came to his aid. Evelyn's fury was uncontrollable, and she didn't stop until Mark lay motionless on the ground. As the reality of what she had done sank in, Evelyn's rage gave way to panic. She looked around, realizing that the commotion could attract attention. She quickly dragged Mark's body to her car, her mind racing as she tried to think of a plan. She knew she needed to get rid of the evidence and cover her tracks. Evelyn drove to a remote area outside of town, a place she knew would be deserted at this hour. She put her hand on Mark's neck. There was no pulse. She carried him into the woods, her heart pounding as she dug a shallow grave. She placed his body in the grave, covering it with dirt and debris. Evelyn's hands shook as she worked, the reality of her actions hitting her with full force. She knew there was no turning back. After burying Mark, Evelyn returned to her car, her mind racing with thoughts of how to cover her tracks. She disposed of his belongings, including his phone, and cleaned the car meticulously, trying to eliminate any traces of evidence. Evelyn knew that the police would come looking for her, but she was confident that she could outsmart them. Back at the shelter, the staff discovered Mark's absence and the signs of a struggle near the entrance. They immediately called the police, reporting him missing and providing details of his situation. The police launched an investigation, quickly identifying Evelyn as the prime suspect. The investigation was swift and thorough. Evelyn's history of abuse, the restraining order, and her known obsession with Mark made her the obvious suspect. The police tracked her movements, interviewed witnesses, and gathered evidence. It didn't take long for them to piece together the events of that fateful night. Friends and family were interviewed, providing crucial insights into the dynamics of Mark and Evelyn's relationship. Paul, Mark's closest friend, recounted the numerous times Mark had confided in him about the abuse. He shared the details of Mark's escape plan and their coded messages, revealing the extent of Mark's fear and desperation. Paul's testimony painted a stark contrast between the public image of the Thompsons and the dark reality behind closed doors. Daniel, Mark's brother, spoke of the early signs of trouble he had noticed in their marriage. He described Evelyn's controlling behavior and the gradual isolation of Mark from his family. Daniel's account of Mark's past trauma and his struggles to rebuild his life added another layer to the understanding of the abuse he had endured. During the interrogation, Evelyn initially tried to maintain her innocence, but the weight of the evidence was too great. Her story unraveled under the pressure, and she eventually confessed to the murder. She described the events of that night with chilling detail, her voice devoid of remorse or empathy. Evelyn's confession confirmed the police's findings, solidifying the case against her. The community of Cedar Ridge was shocked by the revelations. The couple they had once admired and envied had been hiding a dark and twisted reality. The news of Mark's murder and the details of the abuse he had suffered sent shockwaves through the neighborhood. The unraveling of Mark and Evelyn's relationship, from the seemingly perfect marriage to the tragic and violent end, served as a stark reminder of the dangers of domestic abuse. After several days of testimony and deliberation, the jury returned with a guilty verdict. Evelyn was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Her fate was sealed, and the community of Cedar Ridge could begin to heal. The murder of Mark Thompson was a tragic and heartbreaking event that left an indelible mark on the community of Cedar Ridge. The seemingly perfect couple, whose public life had been the envy of many, was revealed to have been hiding a dark and twisted reality. Mark's story became a powerful testament to the hidden dangers of domestic abuse and the importance of recognizing the signs before it's too late.